Hey guys, tonight we slip off the edge of your bedsheets and into a world buried in golden sand, humming with ancient secrets and whispering winds. You stand alone in the vast desert, your sandals already collecting warm grains that somehow feel like they've been waiting thousands of years just to cling to your toes. Before you, pyramids rise like sleeping beasts, their massive stones soaked in amber twilight. The air tastes dry and electric, the kind of air that knows more than it says. The sky above you bleeds slowly from orange to deep blue as stars blink into view. Tiny, glittering dots that the ancients once read like divine letters. You can almost hear the low beat of ceremonial drums carried by the breeze, or maybe it's just your heart, realizing that this place has seen empires rise and fall while you were busy deciding whether to microwave leftovers. But don't get too cozy. The air may be still, the view stunning, and the history rich. But you're also standing about 10 feet from the kind of cobra that inspired entire gods. And you probably won't survive this without at least one awkward camel encounter and a sunburn in places you didn't know had skin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink, and suddenly, you're in ancient Memphis. Not the one with Elvis, the one with sand, incense, and gods for every awkward bodily function. You're standing beside the Nile as it gently gurgles against its banks, carrying water and mystery from the south. It's the lifeblood of a civilization that somehow managed to last longer than most modern countries have even existed. Behind you, mud brick homes lean gently into one another, and barefoot children laugh while chasing a goose that's way too confident for its own good. The smell of baking barley bread wafts from an open window, mixing with the ever-present tang of sun-baked fish and wet river reed. Someone nearby is hammering a chisel into limestone, and you quickly realize this place is alive. Not just historically important, alive, bustling, sweaty, loud, and somehow still enchanting. You glance toward the horizon, where the golden pyramids of Giza loom, not just tombs, but statements, literal skyscrapers of "Don't forget me," standing firm against time, sandstorms, and every amateur archaeologist with a shovel and a dream. These aren't just landmarks. They're proof that humans once looked up at the sun and said, "Yeah, I think we can build something to impress that." Historians still argue whether the pyramids were purely tombs, cosmic portals, or just really overbuilt real estate flexes. But as you walk toward their massive shadows, one thing is clear. They were meant to last, and they kind of have. Not bad for a civilization that didn't even have concrete. You duck under a shady palm where a local scribe, ink-stained fingers and all, is mumbling something about temple inventory while sipping a cloudy date drink. He glances at you and snorts. "First time seeing the pyramids?" You nod. He smirks. It's always the heat that gets them. The truth is, ancient Egypt wasn't all gold masks and Anubis statues. It was relentless sun, stinging insects, and the constant balancing act of pleasing gods while avoiding heat stroke. Most people lived short, back-breaking lives. And yet, they built monuments so perfect that even modern engineers occasionally scratch their heads. Take the Great Pyramid. Over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing as much as an SUV, stacked so precisely that you couldn't slide a credit card between them. Not that they'd accept credit, only grain, beer, and occasional goat exchanges. And don't forget, They didn't have wheels, just a lot of logs, ingenuity, and people who really wanted the pharaoh to like them. Now here's your quirky fact of the evening. Some scholars believe that pyramid workers were paid, not enslaved, and that they got paid in beer, daily beer rations, like a hot, fermented ancient version of a lunch break. Imagine building a skyscraper after 4 lukewarm ales. Honestly, some modern construction projects kind of feel that way too. And over there, that's the Sphinx, half lion, half pharaoh, all mystery. Its nose, as you may have noticed, is missing. No one can agree how it got knocked off. Cannon practice, erosion, a divine sneeze? The theories vary, and historians still argue whether it was a natural collapse or some particularly aggressive tourists. Regardless, it adds to the drama, doesn't it? As the sky darkens, you sit on a warm boulder and stare out over the dunes. You swear the wind whispers something ancient, but it might also be your stomach asking for chickpea stew. Either way, the land around you feels like a museum with no walls, a place where the past hasn't left, just layered itself like sandstone, waiting to be read. Someone walks past, humming a tune that hasn't changed in 3,000 years. A priest adjusts his leopard skin sash as he steps into a nearby shrine, and a boy splashes in the Nile, completely unaware that someday his land will be excavated by wide-eyed Europeans claiming to discover what was never lost. You lean back, the sand still warm beneath you, and take a deep breath. This is just the beginning. There are still mummies to wrap, gods to argue with, and scarab beetles to politely avoid. But for now, the pyramids glow softly in the starlight, quiet and eternal, like they've been waiting for you. You wake up with a sore back and a sunburn you didn't sign up for. That boulder? Definitely not as soft as it looked. Around you, the workday has already begun, if you can call it that. When it's still barely light, and the air already feels like someone left the oven on. You're now one of thousands, yes, thousands of workers dragging, lifting, sweating, and occasionally swearing your way through pyramid construction. The idea sounded kind of noble last night, didn't it? Help build one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world? You were in. But now that you're hauling a sled packed with limestone up a wooden ramp, slipping every few feet, the romanticism is quickly leaking out with your body fluids. A foreman yells something in Egyptian that definitely isn't a compliment. You're not sure what it means, but the tone screams, "Pull harder, rookie!" So you pull. The sled creaks. The rope burns your palms, and you start thinking about career changes. Goat herding, maybe. Now here's your mainstream fact of the day. Despite what many cartoons may have suggested, the pyramids were not built by slaves whipped into misery. Archaeological digs in the workers' villages have turned up surprisingly decent living quarters. Pottery, tools, even little graffiti jokes. Some carvings call themselves things like the Drunkards of Menkora, which sounds suspiciously like the world's first construction crew nickname. Instead, most of these workers were likely farmers. See, when the Nile flooded each year, their fields were underwater anyway. So instead of twiddling their thumbs or inventing paddle-boat volleyball, many of them helped build temples and pyramids as a sort of national service. You could think of it as ancient Egypt's version of jury duty, but with a much higher risk of hernia. Still, life on the work site was no luxury cruise. Your diet today? Bread, onions, and beer. Which sounds fun until it's day 45, and you would trade your last copper ring for a mango. Sanitation is minimal. Hygiene? Debatable. And that guy beside you just sneezed directly into the wind. Thanks, Nebu. But there's a strange camaraderie forming. You slap mud onto a block, while someone next to you whistles a tune passed down for generations. A teenage boy cracks a joke about your hauling posture. Rude, but fair. The old man beside him says he once saw Pharaoh Snefru ride by on a chariot so shiny it made a priest faint. You're not sure whether to believe him, but it's a good story, and that's half the point. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some fringe theorists, despite all the evidence to the contrary, still insist aliens helped build the pyramids. Like extraterrestrials, took one look at the cosmos, zoomed over light years of galaxies, landed in Egypt, and said, "Hey, let's stack some rocks." Sure. Because clearly, interstellar beings traveled billions of miles for manual labor. Back on Earth, you finally make it to the top of the construction ramp. You wipe the sweat from your brow with what used to be the clean corner of your tunic and peer out over the desert. From up here, Bipua, the pyramid looks almost done. But almost, in pyramid terms, still means another decade or two. And when it is finished, it'll stand taller than any structure in the world for the next 3,800 years. No pressure. And here's the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the ramps used to haul the stones were straight, spiral, zigzag, or something we haven't imagined yet. Some say they dismantled the ramps after construction. Others claim evidence still lies buried beneath the sand. We just don't know. What we do know is that whatever they did, it worked. And it worked without cranes, forklifts, or Bob the Builder. At midday, a supervisor hands out the beer rations. It's warm, cloudy, and full of calories. Basically, ancient Gatorade. You gulp it down and feel just slightly less like a walking sun-dried tomato. A woman nearby sharpens a copper tool while balancing a jar on her head. She looks about 10 times more competent than you and only half as sweaty. Around the site, artists are carving intricate hieroglyphs into temple walls. Not just symbols, but whole stories of gods, kings, floods, dreams, taxes. One block shows a worker clearly flipping off his supervisor in glyph form. Another shows a man falling off a ramp. You suddenly feel less alone. A priest arrives to perform a blessing over a cornerstone. He sprinkles incense and chants while everyone pretends not to fall asleep standing up. He draws the Eye of Horus in the sand, asks the gods to keep the structure strong, and casually mentions not angering any tomb spirits, which is always reassuring to hear when you're 2 stories up with a hammer. Later, as the sun begins its slow descent and paints the sand in burnt orange, you get a moment to rest. You sit on the unfinished ledge, legs dangling, watching the Nile sparkle in the distance. A breeze rolls in, warm but kind, and you feel a little like a god yourself, high above the world. Below, other workers carry torches and sing songs as the night shift starts. You overhear one guy swearing he saw a glowing orb last night float above the pyramid and vanish. Definitely Ra, he insists. Another shakes his head. More like fermented barley hallucinations. You close your eyes, listening to the rhythmic sounds of chisels tapping, sleds sliding, and someone loudly regretting a bad lentil stew. You're sore, sunburned, and several layers dustier than when you started. But also, you're part of something big. Bigger than any one person. Bigger than your blisters. A monument not just to kings, but to human persistence, teamwork, and just a little bit of beer-fueled madness. Your feet ache, your back is screaming, and your tunic smells like regret. But hey, you're not hauling stone anymore. Today, you've been chosen for something far more fragrant. Congratulations, you're helping with a mummification. Now don't wrinkle your nose just yet. Sure, There's a strong possibility of encountering partially dried organs, a few mystery fluids, and a surprising amount of salt. But it's also a front-row seat to the most sacred ritual in all of Egypt. And if you play your linen strips right, you might even avoid vomiting. You follow a high priest through a narrow temple corridor lined with flickering oil lamps and painted walls. Each panel tells the story of life, death, and the long, slightly bureaucratic journey to the afterlife. The air is thick with incense, frankincense, and myrrh, doing their absolute best to cover what lies ahead. Inside the embalming room, it's cool and shadowy. Stone slabs are arranged like altars, and on one of them lies a very recently deceased nobleman, looking surprisingly peaceful for someone who's about to be turned into a dehydrated museum exhibit. Nearby, jars wait patiently, each labeled with the symbol for one of the 4 sons of Horus. You'll come to know them well. Very well. Your job? Assist the bandager. Don't mess it up. Here's your mainstream fact. The ancient Egyptians believed that preserving the body after death was essential for the soul to recognize and return to it in the afterlife. Without a body, your soul's like, "Sorry, who dis?" And poof, no eternal bliss for you. That's why mummification wasn't just hygiene. It was survival. Spiritual survival. The first step in this sacred spa treatment? Remove the squishy bits. The brain? Out through the nose. Yes, really. With a hooked instrument that, honestly, looks like it should never go near a skull. You wince as the priest demonstrates, and the scraping sound echoes just a little too long. Next up, the organs. Liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, all gently coaxed out and placed into their respective canopic jars. Each jar is topped with a protective deity's head. One looks like a falcon, another, a baboon. You don't question it. You're mostly trying not to drop anything. And here's your quirky tidbit. The ancient Egyptians didn't preserve the brain. They thought it was just filler. All the important thinking? That happened in the heart. So while the brain went out with yesterday's goat scraps, the heart stayed in. Or at least, that was the plan. But here's where things get murky. Historians still argue whether the heart was always left inside the body, or sometimes replaced by a magical amulet shaped like a heart. There are mummies with missing hearts, and no one agrees on whether it was ritual, robbery, or just ancient embalming interns screwing up the checklist. You sidestep a small puddle of something unidentifiable and grab a roll of linen. Time to wrap. It's not just about covering the body. It's a ceremony. Prayers are whispered with each layer. Tiny amulets are slipped between folds to protect against evil. One priest chants the spell to prevent the dead from being eaten by crocodiles in the afterlife, which, frankly, seems like a solid precaution. As you wrap the hands, the fingers curl slightly, probably just rigor mortis, but you nearly jump out of your sandals. The older assistant laughs softly. "First time?" You nod. He shrugs. "You get used to it. The smell, not so much." Eventually, the nobleman is wrapped head to toe like a very expensive divine burrito. A golden mask will be placed over his face. His sarcophagus, a multi-layered coffin decorated with paint, gold leaf, and hieroglyphs, waits nearby. Later, he'll be lowered into a tomb packed with furniture, food, and letters to the gods. Ancient Egyptians didn't pack light. Eternity's a long time. There's a short ceremony, priests swinging incense, chanting hymns, drawing protective symbols in the air. Then the opening of the mouth ritual begins. This one's big. Using a special tool, the priest symbolically opens the dead's senses so they can eat, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. Imagine going to bed forever, but needing someone to literally unlock your ability to taste again. Eternal brunch, anyone? Someone hands you a jar labeled natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture that dehydrates the body. You use it to dust any remaining surfaces. It clings to your skin, rough and oddly warm. Mummification takes 70 days total, though you'll only be part of the wrapping squad today. Still, you'll smell like ancient spice and faintly sour linen for a week. By now, the nobleman's soul, his ka, is believed to be watching. Maybe he's pleased. Maybe he's rolling his ethereal eyes at the uneven wrapping job you did on his left ankle. Either way, his body is ready for burial. And his soul? Off to the field of reeds, an eternal version of Egypt, where the crops always grow, and the beer never runs dry. You take a moment before leaving the chamber. A breeze filters in through a slit in the temple roof, catching the edge of a linen strip and lifting it gently. It's quiet now. Sacred. You feel like you've touched something old and profound, and not just because you accidentally brushed a pancreas earlier. Outside, the sun hangs low. The Nile glows. A donkey brays in the distance, breaking the silence like a sneeze in church. You smile. Death here isn't something to fear. It's a continuation, a return, a preparation for a life better than this one. Assuming, of course, you remembered all the right spells. You exhale, brush salt from your fingers, and walk toward the golden light. Next time you decide, someone else can pull the brain out. You're still picking flakes of dried natron out of your sleeves when the temple bells chime from somewhere up the river. The air shifts. It feels thicker, charged. A procession winds its way down a painted avenue. Gold glints. Incense curls in lazy loops. Drums beat a low, hypnotic rhythm. You shuffle closer, and suddenly you're surrounded. By gods. Well, not actual gods, just people dressed like them. But in ancient Egypt, the line between human and divine was thinner than a reed papyrus scroll. Today's festival is dedicated to Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship in the sky. Or maybe it's Bastet, or Anubis. Honestly, it's hard to tell, because this pantheon is massive, messy, and includes more animal heads than a very confused petting zoo. You duck behind a stone pillar to observe the spectacle. Priests march past in elaborate robes. One wears a jackal mask so detailed it seems to breathe. Another has a painted cow's head balanced over her own. Someone else is clanging cymbals and dancing like they've had one too many pomegranate wines. The crowd cheers. You try to blend in and clap too, just in case anyone's watching. Mainstream fact time. Ancient Egypt had over 2,000 documented deities. Some were worshipped across the whole kingdom, like Ra, Osiris, and Isis. Others were more like regional managers, local spirits of rivers, fields, or even doorways. The divine was everywhere, and everyone had a favorite. Your neighbor might pray to Thoth for wisdom, while you begged Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, to protect your family. No judgment. And then there's Seth, the god of chaos, desert storms, and probably bad hair days. He's got the head of an unidentified animal, part dog, part aardvark, part, we're not sure. Just go with it. Historians still argue whether the Seth animal was based on a real extinct creature, or if it's just ancient Egypt's answer to draw a monster from memory. You wander deeper into the crowd and find yourself beside a painted shrine. A priestess leans in close and whispers, "The gods walk among us." You blink. Then she sneezes and walks away. So, maybe they do, maybe not. Nearby, children laugh and play a game where they try to balance lotus flowers on their heads while chanting the names of the gods. One kid yells, "Ptah!" and falls over. Another shouts, "Sobek!" the crocodile god, and starts snapping his arms like jaws. You're not entirely sure whether to laugh or join in, so you do both. Quirky tidbit incoming. Egyptians actually kept sacred animals in temples. Real ones. Live crocodiles, baboons, even ibises. And when those animals died, they were mummified and buried in dedicated cemeteries. Entire underground tunnels filled with millions of mummified cats and birds. You have to wonder how anyone ever managed to take a walk without tripping over a divine pet. As the sun climbs higher, the festival intensifies. Dancers twirl with bronze mirrors, trying to catch the eye of Hathor, the goddess of joy, beauty, and music. She's usually depicted as a cow or a woman with cow horns, which feels like a bit of a branding challenge, but somehow she pulls it off. You get offered a fig and a swig of something vaguely fermented. You take both. Then come the statues. From inside a sacred bark, a golden boat-shaped platform carried on the shoulders of sweating priests, the statue of Horus is revealed. His falcon face shines with obsidian inlays. The crowd gasps. You find yourself instinctively bowing your head, even though it's clearly made of wood and gold. Still, it's got presence, the kind that makes your neck tingle. The priests carry him into the temple. Only the most high-ranking officials get to see what happens next. The rest of the crowd waits outside, humming, praying, or just passing around more date cakes. One old man next to you mumbles, "The gods speak only to those who remember how to listen." You nod solemnly, then realize he's talking to his cat. Here's the open scholarly debate. Even today, researchers still argue whether these divine statues were believed to be inhabited by the actual gods during rituals, or merely symbolic. Some inscriptions suggest the statues ate offerings and spoke through signs or dreams. Others argue it was all metaphor, dressed in drama. You try to imagine a god climbing into a wooden bird body just to listen to offerings of goose stew and perfume. But then again, you've seen weirder things here. Afternoon heat ripples across the temple steps, and you retreat into the shade. A storyteller is entertaining a group of children, spinning tales of Ra's nightly journey through the underworld. He fights snakes made of chaos, sails in a sunboat, and sometimes has to be rescued by other gods who show up fashionably late. It's part epic, part fever dream. The kids are spellbound. So are you. And through it all, you realize something. The gods aren't distant figures here. They're woven into every part of daily life, into the fields, the rivers, the walls of houses, even the jokes. When someone sneezes, they invoke a deity. When they bake bread, they thank the grain god. When they trip over a basket, they blame Seth. The sun begins to lower, and the festivities ease into a gentle hum. The priests emerge once more, placing the bark back on its platform. The statue is covered again. The god has spoken. Maybe. Or at least shown up for the party. You sit beneath a fig tree, watching the crowd slowly drift away. Some laugh. Some pray. A boy chases a butterfly that, for a brief moment, looks like it has the wings of a falcon. You sigh, your mind spinning from gods with cat faces and holy hippos. Egypt doesn't ask you to believe. It just invites you to wonder. The sun rises, golden and unapologetic, and you're already sweating through your linen tunic as you stand at the edge of the Nile. The river stretches wide and lazy, glittering like a spilled necklace under the morning sky. Papyrus boats drift by, their sails catching the breeze just enough to avoid work looking like work. You squint at the water and notice something odd. It's not always this calm. In fact, depending on the season, it either gives generously or refuses to cooperate altogether. Today, it's polite. In a few months, it might decide to swallow entire fields. Here's your mainstream fact. The ancient Egyptians based their entire civilization around the Nile's annual flooding. Called the inundation, it arrived like clockwork, most of the time, between June and September, soaking the land in rich black silt. Without it, Egypt would have been just a hot sandbox with some fancy statues. With it, they could grow wheat, barley, flax, and enough onions to power an entire pyramid cruise breath. You hop aboard a reed boat, pushed off by a grumpy fisherman who grumbles something about crocodiles and lazy gods. You wave. He doesn't wave back. Classic. As you drift downstream, you pass farmers knee-deep in mud, laughing as they sling baskets of silt onto dry patches. Children splash each other beside the banks, their laughter harmonizing with the distant clatter of wooden irrigation devices called shadufs. These things look like seesaws with buckets, but they're genius for scooping water onto higher ground. Simple, effective, and still used today in parts of Egypt. There's a rhythm to life here that you start to feel in your bones. Flood, plant, harvest, repeat. It's like Earth itself set a calendar, and Egypt said, "Cool, we'll build an empire on that." A scribe sitting beside you adjusts his reed pen and grunts. Not always so predictable, though. He gestures toward the water. Sometimes the Nile rises too much, drowns villages, or not enough, and we starve. He pauses, scribbles a line on his papyrus scroll, and adds, "That's why we watch the stars." He's talking about Sopdet, the star we call Sirius. When it rose just before dawn, it signaled the start of the inundation. Egyptian astronomers had whole charts and calendars based around it. This star wasn't just pretty. It was an agricultural warning bell. Or, the ancient world's version of a very shiny Google Calendar notification. Fringe tidbit time. There's a persistent theory that the Nile's predictable floods helped shape the Egyptian obsession with cycles. Life, death, rebirth. After all, the land died every dry season and was resurrected by the floodwaters. It's poetic, and maybe true. Or maybe people just really like reliable soil. You notice a family gathered at a small shrine near the bank. They're pouring water from the river into clay jars and offering it to a carved statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile. Hapi's depicted as androgynous, with a round belly and water plants on his head, basically the divine embodiment of well-fed and well-watered. He's not glamorous, but in this land, he's one of the MVPs. Historians still argue whether Hapi was a localized river spirit who rose to major godhood or was part of the official pantheon from the start. Either way, everyone loved Hapi. You would too if your entire food supply depended on him not getting moody. Further downstream, your boat glides past a small island where priests are chanting something melodic. The air smells like lotus blossoms and wet reeds. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. It's peaceful. Until you spot the crocodile. It's just sitting there, half submerged, blinking slowly like it knows you're watching. And you remember, Sobek. Sobek, the crocodile god, is equal parts terrifying and protective. He's worshipped for his power, his aggression, and, ironically, his ability to ensure the Nile's fertility, because nothing says bountiful harvest like a reptile with a permanent scowl and more teeth than friends. You glance back at the fisherman, who's now using his paddle to very subtly steer you away from the creature. He doesn't like tourists, he mutters. The sun climbs higher. Your boat slows as you approach a small farming village nestled between green fields and dusty hills. Women gather near the river washing clothes, their songs weaving through the air. A boy waves at you with a stick in one hand and a frog in the other. You wave back. The frog does not. You step off the boat and follow a group of farmers toward the fields. They're harvesting emmer wheat, stooping low with bronze sickles and laughter. It's hard work, but there's joy in it, a kind of timeless dance with the land. One of them offers you a chunk of date bread and a sip of warm beer. It's not exactly refreshing, but it's generous. And in this world, that means everything. As you chew, he tells you a story, how once, long ago, the Nile didn't flood. The people despaired. The priests panicked. And then the pharaoh sent a letter to the gods, demanding Hapi return the water. The next morning, the river rose. You raise an eyebrow. He just grins. The gods listen. Sometimes. Later, you sit under a fig tree and watch the Nile shimmer like glass. You think about how everything here is connected. The stars, the floods, the fields, the food, even the frogs. Egypt doesn't just survive the desert. It turns it into poetry, carved in stone and silt and song. The crocodile glides past again, slower this time, almost as if it's nodding. You decide not to wave. You've just survived your first Nile-side picnic, complete with warm beer, smiling farmers, and a crocodile that definitely gave you a look. But don't get too comfortable. The village elder grabs your arm with surprising strength and says, "You can carry baskets, but can you read the words of the gods?" Before you can answer, he's dragging you toward a dusty, sunlit courtyard that smells faintly of ink, sweat, and teenage despair. Welcome to scribe school. It's exactly as fun as it sounds. A dozen kids, ranging from sulky to wide-eyed, sit cross-legged on the ground, hunched over tablets coated in clay or scraps of worn papyrus. A teacher with zero sense of humor paces back and forth, tapping a reed stick into his palm like he's dying to swat someone with it. The lesson? Hieroglyphs. Mainstream fact. Hieroglyphs weren't just decorative squiggles carved into tombs. They were an entire written language, more than 700 symbols, and eventually over 1,000, used to record everything from grain rations to love poems to royal decrees that absolutely no one was allowed to question. Learning them? A full-time job, and a lifelong one, unless you were unnaturally good at memorizing owls' eyes and squatting dudes holding sticks. You sit beside a boy who looks like he's been here for weeks without blinking. His board is covered in elegant rows of birds, snakes, and half-unicorn, half-lion symbols that you can't begin to decipher. You sneak a peek at your own tablet and see a beetle. Just one. You have written the ancient Egyptian word for scarab, and the kid next to you leans over and says, "Wow, bold choice." The teacher snaps his head toward you. "No talking!" His reed stick smacks the ground for emphasis. You jolt upright and decide maybe beetles are good luck. Scribes were the elite nerds of ancient Egypt. Most people, farmers, merchants, even soldiers, were illiterate. So being able to read and write elevated you in society. Scribes got access to temples, court records, secret tomb blueprints, and the gossipiest job logs ever. But they also had to learn how to write 3 separate scripts. Hieroglyphic, used on monuments. Hieratic, the quick, cursive form for everyday use. And eventually demotic, even quicker, for legal docs and street gossip. You try your hand at copying a sentence. Your brush slips, and now a perfectly good ibis symbol has turned into what looks like a confused duck wearing a party hat. The teacher sighs so hard it echoes. "What's that supposed to be?" he asks. You squint. "Joy?" He shakes his head. "That says banana punishment." Quirky tidbit time. There's actual ancient Egyptian schoolboy graffiti that reads, "The teacher is angry. I wish he would fall into the river." So no, the struggle of bad grades and cranky instructors is not new. Your fellow students groan as they're assigned more lines to copy. Some dip their reeds in pots of soot and honey ink, grumbling under their breath. One girl mutters, "If I see another god with a bird face, I'm quitting and becoming a potter." You kind of admire her moxie. During lunch, you escape to a shady corner where older scribes tell horror stories about bureaucratic life. "One mistake on a tax record," says one, "and they blame you when the temple doesn't get its barley." Another adds, "I once misspelled divine and accidentally called the pharaoh's uncle a donkey." You try not to panic. Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue how standardized hieroglyphic education actually was. Some say there were national curriculum models set by the priesthood. Others believe it varied wildly by region and teacher. And since most scribes trained in temples, religious influence seeped into even the most boring inventory list. The afternoon lesson involves math. You gulp. Egyptian math was based on unit fractions, meaning everything had to be broken into parts like 1/2, 1/1 1/16. No decimals, no calculators, just your brain, a piece of papyrus, and raw determination. Today's assignment: calculate how many bricks are needed to build a granary, plus how much beer to pay the workers. "I'll give them 5 beers each," you say proudly. The teacher looks unimpressed. "For 2 weeks of hauling bricks? Per day?" He nods. You'll survive. A few students sneak out early, claiming they have offering duty. One, clearly lying, says he has to go feed the sacred geese. You're tempted to follow, but just then, the head priest walks in. He's tall, stoic, and smells like sandalwood, and the kind of authority that comes with saying, "The gods told me so." He unfurls a scroll and reads a short hymn in perfect rhythmic, hieroglyphic cadence. It's beautiful. Every symbol sounds like a whisper of ancient power. You feel it in your bones, like the words themselves are alive. This is what writing is here. It's not just information. It's magic. Literally. The right symbols could summon protection, heal a wound, or curse your worst enemy's sandals to always squeak. That's the true weight of a scribe's job. Your words could shape the world, one careful stroke at a time. As the sun sinks and casts long golden shadows over the temple walls, your classmates gather their tools and shuffle home. You linger a moment, tracing your finger over a single hieroglyph carved into the stone floor. An open eye. Watching. Waiting. Tomorrow, you'll learn how to write the word for eternity. But for now, you're just grateful your duck looked vaguely majestic by the end. You've survived scribe school with only minor ink stains and a new respect for ducks, but now you're being pulled into something darker. Literally. You're holding a flickering oil lamp, descending into the bowels of the earth behind a high-ranking priest who muttered, "Don't wander," and then promptly vanished into the gloom. The walls are damp. The air smells like old dust, decaying papyrus, and whatever incense the embalming chamber forgot to clean up. Behind you, the tomb entrance is sealed. Just for now, they said. Nothing to worry about, they said. This, you realize, is where the stories of curses are born. You're in a tomb, a real one, deep underground. The kind that hasn't been opened in centuries, or maybe ever. The kind that makes your neck hair rise and your sandals suddenly feel very loud. Mainstream fact: Egyptians didn't bury their dead just anywhere. Tombs were sacred, purpose-built portals to the afterlife. Every chamber was designed with intention, from the alignment of the corridor to the protective spells painted in cobalt and ochre on the walls. And if you were important enough, your final resting place was essentially an underground mansion, with booby traps and snacks. You brush cobwebs from a carved doorway and step inside the burial chamber. The walls burst to life with stories, scenes of the dead king sailing across the sky, defeating serpents of chaos, receiving hugs from falcon-headed deities. These aren't just illustrations, they're instructions, a spiritual user manual for surviving eternity. Your lamp flickers. Of course it does. Someone beside you mutters, "Shouldn't be here after sunset." You glance sideways. No one's there. You tell yourself it's just nerves, or echoes, or that fermented fig beer finally hitting weird. Quirky tidbit time. Tomb curses? Not just Hollywood drama. Some real Egyptian tombs had inscriptions warning trespassers of divine revenge. One famously said, "They who enter this tomb shall be eaten by crocodiles, stung by serpents, and carried off by desert spirits." Honestly, they could have just posted a "Do Not Disturb" sign. But the drama? Impeccable. As you walk deeper into the tomb, the ceiling lowers and the air thickens. Your torchlight catches the glint of gold, just a tiny shimmer behind a collapsed wall. Curiosity wins, obviously. You squeeze through a narrow opening, one arm outstretched, and suddenly tumble into a hidden chamber. Congratulations. You found the room that shouldn't be opened. Sarcophagi line the walls. Small ones. Not for humans. For animals. Cats. Falcons. And even a coiled-up snake with jeweled eyes. These were sacred offerings, mummified and buried with care. But something feels off. There's a cracked jar in the corner. From it spills a powdery mix of resin, linen scraps, and a faintly metallic smell that makes your stomach flip. At the center of the room stands a statue of Anubis, jackal-headed god of the dead, carved in black stone, eyes staring directly into yours. You freeze. Not because you believe the statue's alive, but because it's whispering something inside your head. Or maybe that's just your anxiety staging a comeback tour. Suddenly, a breeze blows through the chamber. No open doors, no movement. Just cold air, curling around your legs like a warning. Here's your open scholarly debate. Archaeologists still argue over how many tombs remain hidden in Egypt. Some believe there are thousands, untouched and buried beneath centuries of sand. Others argue the major finds are done, that we've seen all there is to see. And yet, new discoveries pop up almost yearly. The desert, it seems, still holds its secrets close. You back away slowly, whispering a polite "thank you" to the statue. Because honestly, why risk it? As you squeeze through the gap into the main chamber, you swear the jackal's head tilts a millimeter. You don't run. You briskly retreat. Outside, the tomb workers light torches and prepare for sealing. This one was discovered by accident during a temple renovation. A hidden door, a mist chamber, a forgotten royal aunt who apparently loved cats more than people. Her name is etched on a gold amulet found beside the smallest sarcophagus. She died young, but was buried like royalty. A young excavator holds up a cracked mirror and says, "They used to believe you could trap spirits in these." You glance at your reflection, then quickly look away. just in case. Later, as the tomb is resealed, you sit under a starlit sky, the desert chill creeping in now that the sun's abandoned the scene. You think about the people buried here, not just the kings, but the workers, the artists, the grieving families who placed amulets with trembling hands. These weren't just corpses wrapped in linen. They were lives, beliefs, fears, and hopes all bundled together with magic spells and the very best intentions. And now, here you are. A witness, a trespasser, a slightly sweaty storyteller perched between the past and the sand. Behind you, the stone slides back into place, sealing the tomb once more, hopefully for good. After a night of regretting every decision that led to squeezing into a haunted cat tomb, you wake up craving something far less cursed. Maybe a spa day, or at least a clean tunic and a chance to not inhale 3,000-year-old ghost dust. Lucky for you, today's all about Egyptian fashion and beauty, where looking fabulous was basically a religious obligation. And if you thought linen robes and eyeliner were just for statues and Hollywood extras, think again. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with style, and not just the rich folks. Everyone, from farmers to pharaohs, knew that presentation mattered. You begin your day in a small but lively market, where the air smells of perfume, grilled onions, and ambition. The sun's already climbing, but people are bustling around stalls stacked with fabrics, glass beads, and cosmetics in tiny jars. A woman with precisely braided hair grabs your wrist and says, "You look like you could use some coal." You don't argue. Mainstream fact: coal, black eyeliner made from ground galena, a lead-based mineral, was worn by nearly everyone. Not just for the looks, though that sharp-winged eye was always in. It also served a practical purpose, reducing glare from the sun and possibly preventing eye infections. Basically, it was sunscreen. And swagger in one. The woman expertly lines your eyes with a smooth stick, pausing only once to mutter, "Blink again, and I'll draw a cobra on your cheek." The result? You suddenly understand why gods are depicted with eyes like they're permanently judging you. You feel regal, and possibly dangerous. Then it's on to clothing. You're handed a fresh linen tunic, white, crisp, and pleated tighter than your last bad decision. Linen was the fabric of choice in Egypt, lightweight, breathable, and perfect for a place where shade is considered premium real estate. For fancier occasions, people wore translucent layers, embroidered collars, and wide belts that screamed, "Yes, I am attending a festival, and I will judge your sandals." Speaking of which, sandals were often made from woven papyrus or leather. You slip on a pair that feels like walking on braided toast. Functional, yes. Comfortable-ish. A boy runs past carrying a pot of something green and gloopy. You ask what it is. He replies, without a trace of irony, "Sunscreen." And here comes your quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used crocodile dung, yes, actual dung, as part of their skincare regimen, supposedly for sun protection or fertility rituals, depending on who you ask. Either way, not something you want melting down your leg on a hot day. You pass a group of noblewomen lounging beneath a canopy, sipping pomegranate juice and having their wigs adjusted by servants. Yes, wigs. And they were fabulous. Many shaved their heads for cleanliness and coolness, wearing elaborate hairpieces styled with beeswax, braids, and beads. Some even added scented cones of wax that melted slowly over the scalp, keeping them fragrant all day. Ancient elegance meets very questionable logistics. Here's the scholarly debate. While many depictions show women with those perfume cones, no actual cones have ever been found in burials. Were they real? Symbolic? Fashion exaggeration? Historians still argue whether they were ritual, practical, or just art doing what art does. Lying slightly. You duck into a perfumery where clay jars line the walls, labeled in a language you almost understand. Scents like myrrh, blue lotus, frankincense, and something that smells suspiciously like toasted goat waft through the room. A young man offers you a dab of oil behind each ear and says, "This one's called Winds of Thebes. It's our best seller." You smell like flowers and mild regret. It's fine. Over by the water, you spot workers washing linens on flat stones and laying them in the sun to bleach. Cleanliness was no joke here. Daily baths were encouraged, even for the average person. Rich folks had private pools. Everyone else made do with jars of water, sand scrubbing, and whatever soap-like paste they could make from natron and animal fat. Glamorous? No. Effective? Definitely. Then there's jewelry. Oh, the jewelry. Necklaces with gold and turquoise, bracelets jangling with protective charms, rings shaped like beetles, or falcons, or beetle falcons. You try on a broad collar that nearly reaches your shoulders. It's heavy, but also kind of empowering, like wearing a rainbow shield made of treasure. The merchant says, "Very fashionable, worn by generals and dancers." That feels like the right energy. He tosses in a scarab amulet for luck, and then quietly asks if you're available for embalming side work, but you quickly pretend not to hear him. As the sun starts to lower, you walk the streets watching people prepare for a festival. Children wear flower crowns and carry reed fans. Musicians warm up their harps and flutes. A group of men in matching tunics try, and fail, to synchronize their dance routine. One trips and lands in a basket of figs. You overhear a priest say, "To be clean is to be close to the gods." And that's really what this is all about. The beauty rituals, the wigs, the freshly starched linens. They weren't just vanity. They were spiritual. To care for the body was to honor the divine, which explains a lot about the sandal polishing frenzy you saw earlier. The night arrives warm and perfumed. Lanterns glow. Laughter carries on the breeze. You sit under a fig tree, coal smudged slightly, collar slightly askew, smelling like sacred oils and half a festival cart. And you realize something. You've spent the day in a culture that worshipped both gods and good grooming, where even a field hand might wear jewelry, and cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness. It was godliness. You lean back, letting the starlight wash over you like the soft rustle of linen. Maybe tomorrow you'll tackle a more serious task again. For now, you look good. And in ancient Egypt, that means you're halfway to immortality. You wake to the rhythm of distant drums and gossip louder than a flock of ibis. Something's brewing in the palace, and it's not beer this time. Word spreads quickly, like sand on a windy day. The pharaoh is not a pharaoh. She is a queen, and not just any queen. Hatshepsut, the woman who looked at the patriarchal royal rulebook and said, "Cute, I'll rewrite it." You slip into a crowd gathering near the temple steps, everyone murmuring versions of the same question. Can a woman really rule Egypt? The older priestesses nod, like they've known it all along. The bearded scribes look mildly uncomfortable. You shuffle closer, trying not to trip over a basket of onions. There's incense in the air and anticipation humming through the sandstone like static. You're about to witness a power move so legendary, historians still debate whether it was rebellion, genius, or just exceptional marketing. Mainstream fact: Hatshepsut wasn't the first royal woman in Egypt, but she was the first to officially take the full title of pharaoh. Not queen regent, not sidekick. Pharaoh, complete with crown, crook, flail, and yes, even a ceremonial false beard. Because if you're going to break the mold, you might as well wear a fake beard while you're at it. You watch as Hatshepsut is paraded through the streets. Her expression? Cool as obsidian. Her robes? Immaculate. Her message? Crystal clear. She's not just in charge. She's divine. The daughter of Amun himself. Try arguing with that and see where you end up. Hint, it's probably a shallow grave under some suspiciously fresh paving stones. She waves from a golden chariot, flanked by fan-bearers and priests singing hymns. At her side, giant stone tablets describing her divine birth. That's right, she commissioned an entire myth that claimed the god Amun personally disguised himself as her father to conceive her. Is it dramatic? Yes. Is it brilliant propaganda? Also yes. You walk through her temple complex at Deir el-Bahri, still under construction, and by construction, we mean massive ramps, echoing hammer strikes, and a lot of yelling in ancient Egyptian. Workers haul limestone blocks up steep inclines. Sculptors chisel her image again and again onto columns, walls, and statues, not just as a woman, but as a pharaoh. Broad shoulders, headdress, and all. She knew branding, like Steve Jobs-level branding. Quirky tidbit. Hatshepsut sent ships on a trade expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. It was kind of the Amazon Prime of the Bronze Age, except with incense trees, gold, and exotic animals. Her carvings even show a queen of Punt, short, stocky, and riding a donkey, whose depiction has puzzled scholars for ages. Fashion icon, health condition. Historians still argue whether it was artistic license or a rare medical glimpse. Meanwhile, Hatshepsut's temples boast towering obelisks she ordered carved from pink granite. You try to wrap your head around how these 300-ton monsters were transported miles from Aswan without modern tools. Your only conclusion, very sore workers and a lot of rope. You overhear a stonemason saying, "We don't just build for her, we believe her." That's the power of Hatshepsut. She didn't just rule. She reshaped the idea of what ruling looked like. She preserved peace, focused on trade and temples, didn't lead endless wars or micromanage her army. Instead, she invested in infrastructure, diplomacy, and self-portraits. Lots and lots of self-portraits. Here's the twist, though. After her death, someone tried to erase her. Literally. Statues smashed, name chiseled off walls, temple reliefs defaced. Scholars have long blamed her successor and stepson/nephew. Royal family trees get weird. Thutmose III for the erasure. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe politics. Maybe the patriarchy having a posthumous tantrum. But here's your scholarly debate. Not everyone agrees it was personal. Some think it was about preserving dynastic continuity, scrubbing her out so it looked like there was no interruption between male rulers. Others argue it was an ideological purge. The truth? Still buried beneath layers of dust, time, and chisel marks. And yet, she endures. Even with her name erased in places, her architectural feats couldn't be destroyed. Her story survived, tucked in fragments and rebuilt by modern historians, stone by glorious stone. You sit in the shadow of one of her obelisks, still gleaming under the sun. The crowd is dispersed. Workers sip date wine and fan themselves with their head wraps. A young girl walks past, practicing the royal wave, and you grin, because Hatshepsut didn't just sit on the throne. She redefined it, and whether her image was feminine, masculine, or somewhere between, she proved that power wasn't about beard length, It was about vision, conviction, and a little bit of godly origin story drama. You brush the sand from your tunic and whisper, "Queen," then correct yourself, "Pharaoh." A breeze stirs the palm fronds above. Somewhere, you swear, her temple nods. The sun rises like an oven set to chariot roast, and someone shoves a bronze helmet into your hands. "You'll need this," he says, tightening the chin strap just a little too enthusiastically. Great. You haven't even had breakfast, and now you're being drafted into the biggest military traffic jam of the ancient world. You're heading to the Battle of Kadesh, around 1274 BCE. A fight so hyped, Ramses X had it carved onto practically every wall that would sit still long enough. This guy loved a good flex. You climb onto a two-wheeled chariot next to a driver who smells like onions and confidence. The horses snort impatiently. Your armor, if you can call it that, is more leather cosplay than bulletproof. It's 110 degrees out, and someone just handed you a curved sword with the warning, "Don't point it at your own foot again." Mainstream fact. The Battle of Kadesh was fought between the Egyptians under Pharaoh Ramses II and the Hittites under King Muwatalli II. It's considered the largest chariot battle in history. Some estimates say over 5,000 chariots clashed on that battlefield. That's not a skirmish. That's a full-blown, horse-drawn traffic nightmare. Ramses thought he had the upper hand, until some captured Hittite scouts tricked him into thinking the enemy was far away. Spoiler, they weren't. They were practically in his camp. Surprise? Time to panic stylishly. Your chariot lurches into motion. You grip the railing, ducking as arrows hiss past your ears like angry bees. The battlefield is chaos. Horses rear, sand clouds rise, and commanders shout contradictory orders. You see Ramses himself, charging forward in a blaze of gold and bravado, yelling, "I am like Montu, god of war." You whisper, "Montu better have good insurance." And here's your quirky tidbit. Some historians believe Ramses may have exaggerated just how heroic he was that day. His own inscriptions describe him fighting off thousands alone until reinforcements arrived. Maybe he did. Maybe he had help. Maybe he just had really good PR. At one point, your driver points and shouts, "There's the River Orontes!" You look. It's muddy, wide, and filled with desperate soldiers trying not to drown under their own gear. Suddenly, your situation feels like ancient Egypt's version of a group project gone horribly wrong. Somewhere nearby, the Hittites regroup. They're no pushovers. They've got armored chariots, tactical planning, and possibly fewer self-portraits than Ramses, but better helmets. You finally see the Egyptian reinforcements storming in, units from the southern corps that had lagged behind. The tide turns. The battle ends in, well, kind of a draw. Here's the scholarly debate. Ramses declared it a massive Egyptian victory and celebrated it for decades. But modern scholars argue the outcome was more of a military stalemate. No one won decisively, and eventually both sides agreed to stop fighting. In fact, what followed was even more groundbreaking, the first known peace treaty in recorded history. Carved in stone and written in Akkadian, the treaty spelled out terms of mutual cooperation and defense. Basically, let's stop trying to murder each other and focus on not being invaded by anyone else. You're brought to the royal tent to witness the ceremony. You sip date beer from a very sweaty clay cup while scribes exchange tablets. They seal the treaty with oaths to their gods and a mutual understanding that dragging thousands of men into the desert again was kind of exhausting. Later, you help pack up the camp. Men tend to injured horses, Bards start composing songs where Ramses wins even harder than he already did. You're offered a commemorative necklace shaped like a chariot wheel. You decline politely. As the sun sets over the scorched battlefield, you sit on a hill, helmet beside you, watching shadows stretch across the sand. You can still hear the clang of bronze, the rumble of wheels, the sweaty tension of ancient diplomacy. And you realize Egypt's power wasn't just in stone monuments or glowing temples. It was in its ability to survive, to fight hard, boast harder, and still shake hands when the dust settled. You lie back in the warm sand, wondering if Ramses ever looked at the stars and thought, maybe next time we try not getting ambushed. But somehow, you doubt it. The air is still heavy with yesterday's battle smoke when you wake up to find yourself in a completely different war zone. No swords this time, just scrolls, ink, and an eerie amount of silence. Welcome to the scribal schools of ancient Egypt, where the stakes are high, the styluses are sharp, and you really shouldn't have worn white today. You're herded into a small mud brick room before sunrise, wedged between two fidgety teenagers, chewing on reeds like they're licorice. Before you can ask what you're doing here, a tall man in leopard skin priest robes slaps a reed pen into your hand and bellows, "Right!" Mainstream fact. Literacy was rare in ancient Egypt. Only about 1% to 3% of the population could read and write, and most of those were scribes, highly trained specialists essential to every part of Egyptian society. From temple records and tax logs to magic spells and royal decrees, nothing happened without someone putting pen to papyrus. Your first task is to copy the phrase, "I will not talk in class," 200 times on a pottery shard. The ancient Egyptian version reads something like, "One who speaks idly is beaten soundly." Encouraging. You learn quickly. Hieroglyphs are beautiful, but complicated. There's no alphabet, per se. Instead, each symbol can be a sound, a word, a whole concept. An owl isn't just an owl. It might mean M, or it might be a silent decorative flourish. Your head starts to hurt. You consider eating your ink cake. The boy beside you leans over and whispers, "Want to see a rude glyph I drew of the overseer?" You glance. It's a baboon with a giant nose sitting on a throne. You smother a laugh. The overseer doesn't. You get smacked with a palm rod. Quirky tidbit. Disciplining students was considered totally normal. In fact, entire wisdom texts exist where scribes brag about how much better they turned out because they were regularly beaten. One even says, "A boy's ears are on his back. He listens when he is beaten." Definitely not a Montessori approach. Still, you notice the pride here. These aren't just classrooms. They're future power hubs. Scribes could rise through the ranks to become high officials, tax collectors, even royal advisors. In a world where most people couldn't read, knowledge was a superpower. You suddenly feel a little cooler holding that ink palette. You move from writing practice to record-keeping drills. You're given fake grain deliveries to tally, temple donations to catalog, livestock counts to organize. Everything must be accurate. One wrong mark, and suddenly the gods are short 3 cows, and somebody's getting smited. The head scribe walks by and inspects your work. "Sloppy goose," he mutters. You're not sure if that's an insult or a nickname. Either way, it stings. Later, you're assigned to the House of Life, a kind of scribal library meets magical research lab. Shelves groan under scrolls of medicinal texts, spells, incantations, and star maps. This is where things get weirdly fun. One scroll claims garlic rubbed on the feet will cure headaches. Another outlines how to summon protection from crocodiles using 3 words and a lot of honey. You find one describing the Book of the Dead, a guide for souls navigating the afterlife. It's half travel brochure, half divine cheat code. Here's your scholarly debate. Some scholars think the Book of the Dead was personalized, commissioned by individuals, and customized with spells they thought they'd need. Others believe certain versions were more template than tailored. Historians still argue whether these texts were practical religious tools or part of a broader literary tradition meant for prestige. You copy a spell that reads, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not kicked a goose." You wonder if anyone ever got rejected at the gates of the afterlife for a rogue goose punt. By mid-afternoon, your reed pen feels like part of your hand. You've spilled ink on your knees, your scroll, and possibly the temple cat. No one blames you. The cat's covered in ink already, probably from generations of tired apprentices. To lighten the mood, the students gather in a circle to recite satirical poems. One favorite goes, "The farmer smells of cow dung, the soldier loses his feet, the scribe sips beer and writes under shade." Everyone laughs, and you realize, in ancient Egypt, being a scribe was less about glory and more about survival. You didn't dig canals. You didn't march into Kadesh. You got ink stains and steady pay. As dusk falls, the overseer claps his hands and dismisses you all with a final reminder. Write with care, or be cursed with terrible handwriting in the afterlife. The girl behind you whispers, "Too late." You step outside into the cooling air, brain sore, but spirit oddly satisfied. Somewhere in the city, a noble is dictating a legal contract. Somewhere else, a priest is recording the stars. And it all goes through scribes. You realize that Egypt's greatness wasn't just built with stone and bronze, but with words. Carefully drawn, sometimes sarcastic, often enchanted words. And you? You didn't flunk out. Not yet, anyway. Your fingers are still stained with ink when someone slips a perfumed scroll into your hand. It's sealed with beeswax and smells faintly of cinnamon and lotus. The message? Tonight, House of Beauty, bring nothing, ask no questions. You follow a torch-lit alley to a sandstone building humming with low music and whispers. It's no secret. The House of Beauty isn't just where the elite get pampered. It's where Egypt's secrets of health, grooming, and body magic live. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptians took hygiene and appearance very seriously. This wasn't vanity, it was sacred. Cleanliness pleased the gods, kept away illness, and made sure you didn't smell like an unwashed hippo in the desert sun. They bathed daily, oiled their skin, and shaved almost everything that could grow hair. Tombs and temples show noblemen and women perfectly groomed and made up, even in the afterlife. Death, but make it fabulous. You're welcomed by attendants in flowing white linen. Someone guides you to a cool basin room where your feet are washed with scented water and crushed lotus petals. A nearby brazier bubbles with resin, frankincense, and was that dried crocodile tail? Fringe tidbit. One popular skincare treatment included ground ostrich eggs and sour milk. And if that didn't do the trick, crocodile dung was used in facial masks and even, brace yourself, early forms of contraception. Yep. Self-care came with side effects. You're led past reclining couches, incense smoke drifting like lazy spirits. This isn't a party. It's a full-on wellness ritual. Women apply malachite green eye paint in handheld mirrors, polished from copper. Men dab myrrh oil on their scalps and rub scented fat cones into their freshly shaven heads, waiting for the slow melt to perfume the air. You're handed a jar. The label is unreadable, but the goo inside smells oddly like cinnamon and wet hay. "It's for your skin," someone whispers. "Keeps it soft. Also repels fleas." A noblewoman nearby reclines on a chaise, sipping fermented date wine, while a servant braids her wig. It's elaborate, layered, beaded, and likely glued together with bee resin and patience. Wigs weren't just fashion statements. They were protection from the brutal sun and symbols of wealth. Real hair, fake hair, human or yak. It didn't matter as long as it looked divine. Across the room, someone plays a harp while another guest hums a love poem. You catch a line. "My heart flutters when I see your coal." Swoon. Coal, by the way, wasn't just for looking fabulous. It had antimicrobial properties and helped shield eyes from the blinding Egyptian sun. Cleopatra didn't smudge on eyeliner just for glam. She was basically fighting off infections and haters. You're invited to join a purification steam, which is really just a tiny sauna filled with eucalyptus and loud opinions. Inside, the conversation turns to beauty and status. "Do you think the gods care what we wear?" one woman asks. "They invented linen," someone replies. Another shrugs. "Osiris probably wears leopard print." You slip into the adjoining apothecary, where rows of earthen jars sit neatly on cedar shelves. One contains powdered rose petals, another, ground blue lotus. There's a jar labeled mummy dust, which you really hope is a metaphor. Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these cosmetics and remedies were truly effective medicine or just symbolic. Some ingredients did have healing properties. Others, well, they likely just made people feel better while doing absolutely nothing. But in a culture where magic and medicine blurred, does it even matter? You meet a perfumer who spent decades perfecting a scent called kai-fi, a mixture of honey, raisins, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and wine, aged for weeks. She offers you a dab on your wrist. It smells like a temple in springtime and a bakery at midnight. No wonder pharaohs were buried with vats of the stuff. As you sip sweet palm wine, someone begins painting your hands with henna. Ancient tattoos meant to cool the skin, mark special occasions, and maybe, just maybe, keep away bad spirits. You're not superstitious, but after the scribal school goose incident, you're not taking chances. Across the chamber, a healer chants over a patient with a sore shoulder, applying a poultice of willow bark and date paste. A scribe leans in, muttering, "That's real medicine. Willow bark has salicin. It's basically proto-aspirin." You blink. You're the same guy who drew a farting ibis on your papyrus last week. He shrugs. Multitudes. Later, you're invited to the courtyard for a moonlight soak in a shallow pool. Flowers float on the surface. Musicians play soft rhythms. Someone hands you a fig. Another person fans you with a palm leaf. You've never felt this clean, or this aggressively exfoliated. It's easy to forget that life here wasn't all sandstorms and tomb curses. Ancient Egyptians cherished pleasure, harmony, and bodily health. Beauty was sacred. Fragrance was divine. Even the gods wore eyeliner. As you dry off under the stars, someone hands you a linen robe so fine it practically hovers above your skin. "You look like royalty," they say. You smile, inspecting your hennaed hands and freshly oiled skin. And just for a moment, in this candlelit haze of petals and perfumes, you feel like a god. You wake to the distant wail of a funeral chant drifting over the Nile. It's slow, haunting, less a melody, and more a river of grief curling through the morning mist. And now, like it or not, you're headed to a place where death isn't the end. It's just the world's most complicated boarding process. Today, you're attending an ancient Egyptian funeral. Buckle up. There will be costumes, crying, a ritual boat ride, and possibly a literal heart weighing. You'll want comfortable sandals and a respectful expression. Mainstream fact: the ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife, but reaching it wasn't simple. You had to preserve the body, pass judgment, and earn your eternal reward. Death was essentially a divine bureaucracy, and the paperwork had to be perfect. You arrive at a grand villa where mourners gather in linen wrappings, faces streaked with ceremonial ash. The deceased, a nobleman, lies wrapped in fine linen, an amulet resting on his chest, and a golden scarab placed where his heart used to be. Yes, used to be. His heart was removed during mummification, a priest whispers. Don't worry, we replaced it with magic. You smile awkwardly and pretend that sentence made sense. Mummification wasn't just creepy science, it was sacred. The process took 70 days and involved removing the internal organs, except the heart, unless swapped with charms, drying the body with natron salt, and then wrapping it with hundreds of feet of linen, layer upon layer, spell upon spell. Think of it like divine origami, if origami included resin, beetles, and jars for your kidneys. Quirky tidbit: the embalmers often stuffed the body with sawdust or onions to make it look plump and lifelike. There's at least one mummy in the Cairo Museum who died in his 90s and was mummified with billiard ball-sized onions under each eye. Can't make this stuff up. You're ushered into the mourning procession, where professional wailers begin their song. Yes, hired mourners were common. They'd throw dust on themselves, scream dramatically, and collapse just enough to get a solid Yelp rating. 2 women up front are acting as Isis and Nephthys, the divine sisters of mourning. They stand by the mummy, arms outstretched, crying theatrically. You get goosebumps. Or maybe that's just the scent of cedar oil and unresolved spiritual trauma. You're placed on a papyrus boat along with the family, priests, and the embalmed body, slowly sailing toward the west bank of the Nile, where the sun sets and the dead are meant to rest. The boat creaks. A boy tosses lotus petals into the water. No one speaks. Along the way, a priest reads from the Book of the Dead. You recognize the spells. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not kicked a goose. Still funny. Still sacred. Here's your scholarly debate. Some scholars believe that the Book of the Dead was performed aloud during these rituals, guiding the soul's journey. Others argue it was purely symbolic, a spiritual passport packed into the tomb, but never recited. Historians still argue whether it served a practical ritual purpose or was more like a divine insurance policy. At the shore, you follow the coffin inland through a dry gorge toward the tomb, a carved chamber in a cliff face, cool and still. Inside, the walls gleam with paintings of paradise, green fields, eternal banquets, the soul sailing endlessly with the sun god Ra. If your paperwork's in order, this is where you go. Forever. And now, the main event, the weighing of the heart. Not literally, of course. You don't actually get to see a jackal-headed god scale a human heart like a produce clerk. But the priests reenact it in full costume. Anubis leads the soul. Mahat, goddess of truth, stands nearby. The heart is placed on a golden scale, countered by a feather. If the heart is heavier, laden with sin, the soul is devoured by a monster called Ammit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. Basically, the ultimate You failed. Message. But today, the soul is judged pure. The priest smiles. The family cheers. The nobleman gets to move on, to live forever in the field of reeds, where there's always good food, cool water, and zero bureaucrats. You help carry goods into the tomb. Bread, wine, jewelry, makeup, pet figurines, a tiny bed. He'll need all this, someone says. You never know what the afterlife traffic will be like. Fringe tidbit. Tombs often included model servants, tiny wooden figures called shabtis, meant to do labor for you in the afterlife. Some people were buried with dozens, others had hundreds. Essentially, eternal ghost interns. As the tomb is sealed, the sun dips low, casting shadows over the cliffs. The air feels heavy, final, yet somehow calm. You stand in silence, watching the sand settle. One of the mourners turns to you and says, "If we remember him, he lives. If we forget, he dies again." You nod, suddenly aware of how much the Egyptians feared being forgotten, how they built tombs, wrote spells, painted their dreams, just to whisper across eternity. On the boat ride back, the mood is lighter. People laugh softly, pour wine, share stories of the man now sealed in stone. Death is solemn, but also strangely joyful. After all, if everything was done right, he's off to a place where no one ever runs out of beer, shade, or eyeliner. As you step onto shore, you look back at the fading cliffs. Somewhere behind them, a soul is feasting under starlight. And tonight, you carry a little bit of that eternity in your hair and under your sandals. By now, you've sipped beer with scribes, bathed with perfumers, and watched someone get mummified like a luxury burrito. But tonight? Tonight, you leave the comforts of palace and perfume and step into a realm filled with whispers, ijabatim, basras, fangs, and fur. You're heading into the wild edge of ancient Egypt, where the gods wear animal faces and the creatures just might wear yours. The air turns dry and electric as you follow a desert path out of the city. The Nile fades behind you. Insects chirp warily. You spot hyena tracks near the rocks. A jackal howls somewhere too close for comfort. You might want to tie your sandals tighter. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptians lived remarkably close to wild nature, especially along the fringes of civilization. Lions once roamed the deserts. Hippos patrolled the riverbanks. Crocodiles sunbathed in shallow waters. It was a natural zoo, and not a particularly well-fenced one. You crouch near a shrine, half buried in sand. A priest greets you with eyes rimmed in red ochre. "We offer to the wild gods here," he says, gesturing toward a statue of a jackal-headed figure. Anubis, lord of the necropolis. At his feet, bones, berries, coins, and something that looks suspiciously like a roasted mouse. Fringe tidbit: some desert temples kept animal cemeteries, mass burials of mummified cats, ibises, even crocodiles. They weren't just pets. They were votive offerings, messengers to the gods. Archaeologists have uncovered millions of them. One tomb alone held over 8 million dogs. That's not religion. That's divine hoarding. You're handed a torch and led deeper into the wild. The priest chants softly, calling on gods with animal forms. Horus the falcon, Sobek the crocodile, Bastet the cat. Each represents chaos and order, danger and protection, claws and comfort. You start to get the sense that in Egypt, animals weren't just companions. They were cosmic metaphors with teeth. A gust of sand sweeps the torchlight sideways. You stumble, then freeze. There, across the dunes, glowing eyes. A figure steps forward, sleek, silent, feline. A temple cat. It circles you once, twice, then vanishes into the brush. Lucky, the priest mutters. Or unlucky. Bastet chooses who she visits. Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these animal gods were seen as literal beings, symbolic forces, or something in between. Did Egyptians believe Anubis was an actual jackal spirit walking the dunes? Or did he represent the unseen pull of death and decay? Either way, they offered prayers, built statues, and gave tribute like the gods were absolutely keeping receipts. You reach a rock overhang, and the priest points to faded wall carvings, lions hunted in chariots, baboons dancing under moonlight, crocodiles devouring unlucky fishermen. This isn't National Geographic. It's theology with teeth. A reminder that survival was a constant negotiation with nature. In the underbrush, you spot a hieroglyph for danger, a horned viper. And just as you admire it, the priest says casually, "Watch your step. There are real ones here too." You decide not to move. He tells you of the wild zones, where even the pharaohs' armies hesitated to travel. Vast stretches of desert considered untamable, where bandits, wild animals, and wandering spirits all competed for space. Travelers carried charms, amulets, and sometimes entire baskets of bread to bribe the unseen forces. Imagine TSA, but for ghosts and scorpions. You sit beside a dying fire, surrounded by desert silence so thick it presses into your bones. The stars blaze above, and the moon paints everything silver. From this edge of the empire, Egypt feels less like a country and more like a stubborn miracle. Civilization carved out of claws and sunburn. Nearby, the priest pours milk onto a rock slab. "For Sekhmet," he says, "the lion-headed goddess of war and plague, the original 'do not test me' deity. She once got so angry she nearly destroyed humanity. Only beer dyed red like blood could calm her. You're not saying she's relatable, but he offers you a charm carved from turquoise, shaped like a scarab, warm from his hand. For protection," he says. "Even the gods respect this place." You nod and tuck it into your belt. Not that you're scared. Okay, you're a little scared. Before sunrise, you start your way back to the city. A long walk through tall reeds and shifting dunes. The wind howls like a chorus of ancient jackals, and every shadow looks slightly too alive. But you feel different now, like you've seen the underside of Egypt's glory, the claws beneath the crown. The animals weren't just part of daily life. They were the living edge of myth, messengers and metaphors, gods in a disguise. You remember the mummified cats, the temple jackals, the statues staring with stone eyes. In this land, the divine doesn't wear a robe. It wears fur, feathers, scales, and as you step back into the city, wiping dust from your tunic, a cat watches you from a rooftop. It doesn't blink. Neither do you. By now, you've walked with pharaohs, sailed with priests, and narrowly avoided jackal-related trauma. But tonight, your sandals click down a quieter street. The city is hushed. Torches gutter in iron sconces, and there's a strange scent in the air. Charred resin, honeyed wine, and hot ink? You're stepping into the candlelit world of scribes and scholars, the ancient thinkers who made sure Egyptian civilization didn't just happen, but lasted. You duck under a stone archway and enter the House of Life, part temple, part school, part scribal command center. Scrolls line the walls like rolls of papyrus sushi. An old man with ink-stained fingers waves you in, grumbles something about not touching the blue pigments, and hands you a reed brush that looks suspiciously like it's been chewed on for decades. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptian scribes were elite. They were the data analysts, record keepers, historians, and spell writers of the empire. Trained from childhood, they mastered the complex scripts, hieroglyphic, hieratic, and later demotic, and recorded everything from tax rolls to religious texts. If the pharaoh was the voice of Egypt, the scribe was the memory. You sit cross-legged by a clay tablet, where a young apprentice is practicing the offering formula, a staple prayer for the dead. He mutters aloud, trying not to smear the ink with his sweaty elbow. You whisper the lines with him. An offering which the king gives. Bread, beer, cattle, fowl. Another student nearby is drawing birds, not because he's bored, but because there are literally dozens of bird hieroglyphs, and they all mean different things. There's one for duck, owl, ibis, quail chick. It's a real feathered mess. Egyptian writing wasn't just beautiful, it was exhausting. Fringe tidbit: some scribes left behind snarky notes in the margins of texts. One infamous line reads, "Don't trust a woman. Her heart is like a fishing net." Another, "The youth of today do not listen to their teachers." Apparently, ancient grumbling was alive and well. You move into the scriptorium's restricted scrolls chamber. A priest closes the door behind you. Here, things get serious. Ritual books, astronomical charts, spells from the Book of the Dead, even surgical instructions. One scroll describes how to summon protective spirits by grinding lapis lazuli with lion fat and reciting prayers under a full moon. You casually take one step away from the shelf. Another contains a detailed guide to dream interpretation. Dream of drowning? Beware betrayal. Dream of crocodiles? Unexpected money. Dream of baboons throwing dung at you? No one's sure. Historians still argue whether dream manuals were read like horoscopes or treated more like bedtime insurance. You settle beside a wise-looking instructor who smells faintly of honey and copper. "We record what is," he says, tapping a scroll, "but also what might be. Stories, myths, recipes." He shows you an older manuscript, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor. It's about a man stranded on a magical island, guarded by a talking serpent. There's suspense, drama, a surprise twist. Basically, Egypt's version of a Netflix short film. "Scribes wrote everything," he continues, "from grain inventories to erotic poetry. Nothing was beneath the pen. Everything is worth remembering. Even your sandals, probably. There's probably a 4,000-year-old joke carved somewhere about smelly feet." Back outside, you're taken to the temple courtyard, where a sacred rite is being prepared. Not with drums or incense, but with ink. Tonight is a name renewal ceremony, a kind of scribal blessing, where the names of honored ancestors are rewritten and spoken aloud to renew their memory in the afterlife. You kneel beside a slab of limestone. One by one, the scribes write the names of the dead in elegant hieroglyphs, then pronounce them like gentle spells. You try one. Nebet Hetepet. The name shivers through the still air. Someone nearby nods. She lives again, they say. It's a deeply human moment. For all the grandeur of pyramids and gold, Egypt's true immortality lives in names, etched, repeated, remembered. And the scribes were its guardians. Quirky moment. One older scribe shows you his prized possession, a bronze inkwell shaped like a baboon. Thoth, god of writing, took this form sometimes, he says. Then adds, also, it holds precisely 2 ounces of ink and scares off nosy apprentices. As the ceremony ends, the sky turns violet. You stretch your legs, careful not to knock over the scrolls, and feel the weight of stories, thousands of years of them, tucked into every carved mark, every ink stroke, every little owl and seated man and squiggly fish symbol. Egypt didn't just build history in stone. It wrote it, meticulously, passionately, often sarcastically, and handed it down across centuries like a fragile but fiery torch. You leave the house of life with inky fingers, a borrowed pen, and the name of Nebet Hetepet still warm on your lips. You've inked spells with scribes, dodged crocodiles by moonlight, and survived beauty treatments involving ostrich yolks. You deserve a night off. But not tonight, because tonight you're heading beneath the palace into the hushed, torch-lit labyrinth of Egypt's secret societies and cults, places where what's whispered might get you promoted or cursed. You're escorted by a temple servant who moves like he has no feet. Down narrow halls and around bends lined with statues whose eyes follow you. Just barely. The torches flicker, casting shadows shaped like birds, serpents, maybe even gods, or spies. Mainstream fact. While Egypt had its formal religion, with pharaohs as divine intermediaries, there were also secretive cults and priesthoods that performed exclusive rituals. Many were devoted to specific gods: Osiris, Isis, Thoth, even the dangerous lioness Sekhmet. These orders held immense sway in politics, law, and the supernatural. You reach a chamber carved in the shape of a lotus flower. A hooded figure bows slightly and offers you a white sash. You tie it on and take your seat among the circle. No one speaks for a long moment. Then, softly, someone says, "What is hidden gives life to what is seen." Everyone nods, like this is totally normal and not cryptic at all. You glance around. There's a pot of blue pigment in the center, several scrolls sealed with wax, and, casually, a snake coiled in a clay bowl. It blinks at you. You blink back. Fringe tidbit. Some of these cults used hallucinogenic herbs and fermented lotus to see beyond. It wasn't just symbolic. Blue lotus, in particular, may have had psychoactive effects, creating dreamlike states where initiates reported visions of gods, dead relatives, or oddly aggressive goats. Tonight's ceremony is devoted to Osiris, god of death, resurrection, and seasonal growth. You remember the myth, how he was chopped into 14 pieces by his jealous brother Set and reassembled by Isis, his devoted sister wife, with the help of magic, mourning, and, one very creative prosthetic. A priest begins chanting. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low drone, like water bubbling underground. Others join in. They pass around a cup of date wine mixed with myrrh and what might be mandrake. You sip it because you were raised polite and kind of want to see a god tonight. The room starts to shimmer, not spin, just soften, like parchment in steam. Your thoughts slow. You feel connected. To what? Hard to say. The flickering torchlight? The gods? That weird snake? All of it? Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic, spiritual, or just straight-up drug-induced performance art. Some believe cult initiations involved deeply personal transformation. Others think it was elite role-play with excellent props. Someone places an ankh, a cross with a loop, into your hands. Life, they whisper. Another touches your forehead with black coal. Death. And then someone else? They just gently boop your nose. balance. You might be hallucinating, but honestly, it tracks. Later, you're invited to witness a hidden text, a ritual scroll said to be copied from Thoth's original divine writings. It's written in reverse hieroglyphs. To read it, you'd need a mirror and probably divine patience. The priest gestures to a passage and says, "This one summons light and darkness." You ask, "Like a lantern?" He smirks. "Like truth?" Okay. They also show you a carved ritual knife, not for blood, but for cutting away lies. A symbol of discernment and intimidation. You're not sure which. Quirky moment. A young initiate nervously asks the high priest if his cat is allowed to be blessed. The priest doesn't blink. "All beings are welcome in the presence of the sacred," he says, "even the furry ones." Moments later, the cat barfs up a beetle and sprints across the chamber. Divine, indeed. Back in the main chamber, a final rite is performed. Everyone places a small offering on a central altar. Feathers, jewelry, a carved stone, a perfectly round date. You're told to give what has no weight. You panic and place your breath. A soft exhale. The priest nods. Wise. You are now, apparently, a novice initiate of the hidden path, which is fancy talk for "please don't tell anyone, or the snake might find you." When you return to the surface, the city feels different. Quieter. Brighter. Like you've seen something just beneath its skin. The temples may be grand and open to all, but beneath, Egypt's spiritual life ran deep, strange, and often whispered. Secret orders, moonlit rites, and symbols passed hand to hand, tongue to ear. You walk home slowly, the smell of myrrh still on your tunic, and a curious peace curling around your spine. It's said that Egypt's power wasn't in its gold or armies, but in its ability to bind the visible world to the invisible. Tonight, you finally believe it. You've slipped through hidden rites, downed ancient lotus wine, and survived more divine animals than you care to count. But now you climb higher, up the limestone steps of a temple roof, where the stars stretch like spilled silver over the Nile. Because tonight, you're stepping into the realm of Egyptian astronomy, calendars, and cosmic thinking, where time isn't just told, it's woven into the bones of the universe. The air is cooler here, clean. A breeze brushes your cheeks as you peer over the edge. Below, the city twinkles with torchlight, but above, it's an entirely different kingdom. The stars aren't distant. They're patterned. They're intentional. They're watching. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians were serious about the sky. They used astronomy not just for stargazing, but to guide farming, predict flooding, and structure religious festivals. Their calendar was one of the earliest solar systems. 365 days, 12 months, 3 seasons. A whole civilization set to celestial rhythm. You sit beside a temple astrologer. He's squinting through a polished obsidian disc, basically a very classy prehistoric mirror, and charting the movements of Sopdet, the star we call Sirius. When it rose just before dawn, it signaled the coming inundation of the Nile, which meant life and laundry. "Her light returns," he murmurs, "so the waters will rise." The rising of Sirius was so critical that their entire year began with it. No January, no Monday blues. Just, "Hey, Sopdet's back, time to plant sorghum." Fringe tidbit. Some temples had star clocks painted on the ceilings. These weren't just pretty. Each hour of the night was associated with a different deity or star. Priests could literally tell time by which divine butt cheek was overhead. You lie on your back now, staring upward. The Milky Way arcs above, called by Egyptians the celestial Nile, a mirror of the earthly one. They believed souls traveled along it after death, paddling toward judgment and eternity. Everything here is mirrored, the astrologer says. As above, so below. He draws a crooked line through the sand, and sometimes the stars decide more than weather. He shows you a scroll with lucky and unlucky days. Want to cut your hair? Fine, but not on the 17th of Paopi. Want to bake bread? Definitely not during the rising of Set. That's how you get ghosts in your dough. They didn't just have horoscopes. They had full-on cosmic user manuals. Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians believed the stars caused events or simply reflected them. Were the heavens active players or a divine calendar? Some texts imply predestination. Others, like magical papyri, suggest people could negotiate their fate with the right words, offerings, or protective eyeliner. You peer down from the roof and spot the sprawling zodiac of Dendera etched across a temple ceiling. Lions, scorpions, bulls, all symbols of zodiac constellations. Yep, the Egyptians had a version of astrology too. Different signs, but similar vibes. And no, you're not a Gemini. You're born under the 3rd month of the season of emergence. You mysterious little reed bundle. You. The astrologer taps your shoulder and gestures to the deacons, 36-star groups, each rising for 10 days, used to track hours at night. He flips through a dusty scroll that assigns a personality to each deacon. This one brings boldness, he says, but also rash decisions. He side-eyes your borrowed sandals. You shuffle away politely. Quirky moment. The astrologer admits that sometimes people blamed bad crops on the stars. One year, a priest accidentally announced the wrong decan, and when the barley withered, people pelted him with stale bread. Cosmic accountability was very local. You're offered a chance to view the night sky through the temple alignment shaft, a narrow slit built into the wall, precisely angled to frame a single star during a solstice. You lean down, squint, and gasp. There it is, bright, blue-white, ancient, a pinpoint that has burned since before the pyramids were a glimmer. This is what amazed the Egyptians. Not just that the stars moved, but that they did so on schedule. Predictably, elegantly. The cosmos to them wasn't chaotic. It was ordered. And their job? To sync up. You walk with the astrologer now, following a mosaic of star glyphs underfoot. He tells you of Nut, the sky goddess, arching overhead, her body forming the canopy of night. Each evening, she swallows the sun. Each morning, she gives birth to it again. As the night deepens, you wrap a linen shawl around your shoulders and doze briefly beside the astrologer. He's still watching Sopdet, noting her subtle shift. Soon, he murmurs, the river returns. You realize then, to the Egyptians, time was never just ticking forward. It was cyclical, eternal. Days were boats on the Nile. Years were loops of sun and flood and harvest. Nothing was truly lost, only repeated, like stars returning to their place. And as you drift off under the painted canopy of Nut's arms, you feel a strange calm. Even 4,000 years ago, people stared up at the sky and wondered who they were, where they were going, if the stars meant something, if their names would still be whispered. And tonight, here you are, whispering them back. Your sandals crunch across the morning dust, the horizon just beginning to blush gold, and you're still tasting stars. But don't sit down yet. There's one last place to visit. It waits not in the sunlit temples or starlit tombs, but in a shadowed chamber behind the throne, a place where power hides in plain linen and ink. Welcome to the politics, betrayals, and forgotten queens of ancient Egypt. You're ushered into a palace courtyard where scribes pace with scrolls, nobles whisper behind fans, and royal children practice looking innocent. The scent of honeyed wine drifts in the air, masking something sharper: ambition. Mainstream fact: Egypt wasn't ruled by just golden-faced gods in wigs. Behind the throne, real people made real choices: alliances, conspiracies, and coups dressed up in ceremonial jewelry. The pharaoh may have been divine, but politics? Oh, politics was deliciously human. You're led into the harem wing, not what you think. Sure, it's where royal wives and children lived, but it was also a power center. And tonight, it's bubbling. A servant passes by and whispers, "They're planning to kill the king." You blink. Which king? She raises an eyebrow. Depends who wins. You're in the middle of what modern scholars call the harem conspiracy, possibly against Ramses III. Yes, the same Ramses who threw down at Kadesh and built like his name would never be forgotten. Turns out, not everyone loved that energy. Fringe tidbit: his secondary queen, Ta, was said to have orchestrated a plan to place her son, Pentaweret, on the throne. The plot involved servants, magicians, and a shocking number of wax figurines, ancient sabotage with a pinch of voodoo. You hide behind a curtain as a scribe unrolls a papyrus full of coded messages: names, roles, even the rituals intended to weaken the pharaoh's Ka, spirit. This isn't just palace gossip. This is Game of Thrones, Lotus Edition. The plot was eventually uncovered. The trials? Brutal. Public. Written down in detail. Execution by fire, forced suicides, disfigurements. But here's the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Ramses III actually survived the plot. His mummy shows a deep slit across the throat, only discovered in modern times. So, did he die in bed? Or get throat sliced in a harem heist? No one can say for sure. You tiptoe out, only to bump into a figure clad in shimmering blue and gold. She meets your eyes, steady and unblinking. You realize, this is no servant. This is a queen. Not Ta, not Nefertiti, not Cleopatra. Someone else. Someone history didn't spotlight. Which is kind of the point. Because for every famous royal woman, there were dozens of powerful queens and princesses you never heard about. Women who ruled as regents, held military titles, and commissioned their own temples. Some even took on full pharaonic regalia, beard and all. She speaks softly. The king is the face, she says, but the queen is the spine. You think of Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled for over 2 decades in full king's attire, and even had her statues recarved as male. Or Ahotep, who rallied armies while her son was too young to hold a sword. Quirky moment. One queen once sent a letter to a foreign king, asking him to send one of his sons for her to marry, because all the local princes were unsuitable. It nearly caused a diplomatic meltdown. Egypt, inventing ghosting since 1300 BCE. You stroll through the Hall of Records, where scribes etch names into eternity, or quietly erase them. You run your fingers over a wall where one pharaoh's name has been chiseled out entirely. Damnatio memoriae, someone murmurs, the condemnation of memory. Imagine being so disliked, they uncarved you from history. Twice. But others endure. You glance up at a painted ceiling and see Hatshepsut's cartouche, preserved despite efforts to bury her story. You smile. Queens don't go quietly. And yet, many still did. Power shifted. Lines were rewritten. Sometimes all it took was one generation forgetting a name. But you won't forget. You end your walk in a garden tucked behind the palace walls, lotus blossoms open to the rising sun. A priestess plucks one, hands it to you, and says, "Every throne rises on petals and ash. It's time to go." You've danced at coronations, stolen glimpses into afterlives, snuck into sacred rites, and sipped starlight with priests. You've seen Egypt not as a frozen world of stone, but as a living, breathing, conniving miracle. The Nile flows on, but you now know what rides within it. Papyrus secrets, crocodile teeth, stardust, and queens with steel in their sandals. As the morning wind rustles the reeds, the voices of Egypt rise, some carved in granite, others only in whispers. But tonight, they've all spoken to you. And now, it's time to gently fold away the scrolls, to hang up your linen tunic, and slip quietly out of the temple gates. The sun is high again, the stones warm beneath your feet. But inside you, it's dusk. Soft, calm, slow. You take one last glance over your shoulder. The pyramids shimmer in the haze like mirages carved in time. The Nile glides steadily along its ancient path, still ferrying silt and secrets between distant shores. And the breeze, always the breeze, carrying the scent of lotus, of incense, of centuries. Let your breath match that breeze now. In and out. Like the Nile, steady and endless. Remember the hands that built monuments with bare palms, the voices that whispered spells in candlelight, the stars that told time. And remember, for all the grandeur, Egypt was lived in by dreamers, schemers, builders, lovers, queens, and children with sand between their toes. The gods may have ruled the heavens, but it was people. Clever, flawed, hopeful people who made this world shine. Let your body melt into your bed now, your thoughts drifting like reed boats on the water. If echoes of ancient flutes or the flap of ibis wings fill your dreams, let them. You've been across deserts, through tombs, past thrones, and up to the stars, and somehow you made it home again. Sleep well, little traveler of time. Egypt will be here when you return.